So new concept art has just leaked from Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, and while it looks really fucking cool, we also know that the concept art does not equal what we're going to get in the film. While this shows a lot of promise for what we can expect from Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, the real problem is that it hasn't laid the foundation. There's no groundwork here to really pull all of these elements together in a satisfying way. And so, unfortunately, I think that Avengers Doomsday might be doomed from the start. Hey, what's going on, guys? Griffin back here again with another impromptu, off-the-cuff editorial rant. I brought on my good buddy Owen from Owen Likes Comics.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, I think like between the two of us, we've got this covered. I'm not a ranter. You're not a comics guy, at least not to the kind of nerdy levels that I am. So I think between the two of us, we can have a kind of interesting conversation.
We have this medieval village with Hulk, She-Hulk, and then Hulk's son in there. And so, like, there's been a lot of speculation about, like, oh shit, are we going to get World War Hulk and stuff like that?
Just as an addendum to that, I want to say I'm really glad that Hulk's son has like sorted his hair out.
Oh my god, right? It only took Doom destroying the universe for him to fix his hair. There was a massive concept art leak, basically a Marvel concept artist, or I don't know, someone that had some sort of link to a concept artist, posted a bunch of this concept art onto their ArtStation account, which is insane. Or maybe it was someone else who had direct ties to this artist and they just posted it on there. I don't really know the details of it, but essentially we got looks at Dr. Doom from Avengers Doomsday, Doom holding court in this medieval looking environment. We got a lot of concept art for the Fantastic Four, which was kind of cool to see, which also teased at Nathaniel Richards, which a lot of people expected was going to be in the Fantastic Four film. This kind of confirms that it's an idea that they're thinking about and toying around with. We get a look at what looks like the Young Avengers, more or less, with Star-Lord and Wong. We've got Billy, obviously, and then Wanda's other son, Tommy, thank you, as their superhero alter egos. We've got Kate Bishop and I guess Scott Lang's daughter, Cassie Lang, in there. No Yelena, no Black Widow. I guess she's a little too old for the Young Avengers. And then the other big thing is that Black Panther is going to be a part of this. It seems that they're teasing at potentially recasting T'Challa, or what's likely going to happen is it's going to be T'Challa's son, and he's just kind of aged up in this multiversal shenanigans sort of thing because of a lack of T'Challa or the Black Panther character as a presence. And so I think making sure that these films have a Black Panther of some sorts is very important, and specifically a T'Challa-like figure, because based on this concept art, at least, we're going to get a new Black Panther, and that is going to be a just like blank slate for whoever takes on that mantle, really, because we know that it's not going to be T'Challa. They're not going to try and do some variant thing. It is very, very likely that it is going to be his son as an adult. And that's cool, but the last time I saw T'Challa's son, he was a very little boy. So like I don't like that, bridging that gap, like creating that history, understanding who he is. Like Black Panther in these films will not have the same impact as T'Challa did in those other films, simply because I don't know who this Black Panther is. Like, it's almost like you need another film. You need another Black Panther film to establish him.
Yeah, and obviously this comes with the asterisk that what we see in the concept art will be in the film. There is no guarantee there will be a Black Panther, but I would imagine there would be, just because T'Challa plays quite a big role in the Secret Wars comic, especially in the climax of it. He is kind of one of the major players in Doom's downfall. There's some great stuff in the comic of him and Namor, who are a duo that have had a long adversarial relationship. We get a little bit of that in Wakanda Forever, obviously without T'Challa. But that's a real culmination of their arc as well, and T'Challa gets some great moments to play in that. In regards to what the concept art potentially says about recasting or who this character could be, an interesting thing, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I saw someone who was digging into the files of all the leaks and stuff. Someone claimed that this Black Panther image was labeled T'Chanda, who in some adaptations and some universes is actually T'Challa's grandfather, who is Black Panther that fights with Captain America in the Second World War. Maybe it could just be the son, or, you know, someone from another universe altogether. But Black Panther is such a big part of the Marvel universe. I do think at some point Marvel will want that character back in play in the main Marvel universe. Just like my blanket reaction to the images, I think everything looked really good. You know, there's that shot of Doom where he's kind of just like, there's kind of solo image of Doom where he's on the throne. And while I do have a lot of reservations and concerns with the casting and how the character's being introduced. I'd be lying if I said if that was how Doom looked on screen, that they wouldn't have nailed at least the physical appearance of the character. And the same with kind of the court sequence that we saw, which is like straight out of the first issue or the second issue of Hickman's Secret Wars. The kind of Game of Thronesy, Lord of the Rings style kind of feudal kingdom. That stuff, is straight out of the comic. And like we said, I don't know how much the movie will adhere to these images or how much these images are reflective of what the films will be. But just as isolated pieces of art, I thought they all looked very interesting, very promising, and I would like it to be reflective of what the movies are going to be like.
I think a big part of the Secret Wars comic is that it is the culmination of so many relationships and a history, decades long histories of these characters that they're going to then cram into these two films. And especially because phases 4 and I guess whatever phase 5 section that we're in right now hasn't really laid a foundation. We don't really know what the status quo of this universe is. We don't know character relationships.
Yeah, it's kind of been meandering for a few years just on its own. And then, they were seemingly building in the Kang direction. And then, after Quantumania and everything that's happened with Jonathan Majors, they've clearly pivoted away, not just from that actor, but from that character and plot point altogether. There could still be a way that there could be some use of all of that build up in Secret Wars, which I can touch on later. But for the large part, there's been a very clear pivot away from Kang and into Doom. Which, Doctor Doom is my favorite villain in all of comics. I love the guy, but I would be lying if I said I didn't have concerns over kind of the speed in which he's been introduced and how quickly we're getting to Secret Wars. So like I said earlier, Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman and Asad Ribic is one of my all-time favorite comics. To avoid any confusion to people who aren't like super hardcore comic readers, the 2015 Secret Wars comic is more than likely the book that Marvel will be adapting for the film. But Secret Wars was originally a comic book from 1984. Basically, it was a tie-in book to promote a new line of action figures of the same name called Marvel Superhero Secret Wars. And while the comic does have its charm, I think it is quite fun. It's a pretty one-note and straightforward story. An alien being called the Beyonder takes a collection of heroes and a collection of villains from Earth and creates this new planet called Battleworld, and they have to fight it out to determine whether or not good is stronger than evil. It's a pretty straightforward story. It's where we get the first appearance of the black suit and symbiote Spider-Man, so it's noteworthy for that. But Hickman and Ribic's Secret Wars from 2015 kind of takes that essential premise and reimagines it in an almost like Tolkien, Frank Herbert-esque way. The thing about Secret Wars that I love it for so much is that, it does feature all these different variants from other universes and all of these big multiversal stories. But at the crux of the story, it's very personal and a very human tale about two characters and two men that have kind of driven the Marvel universe forward since the 1960s, those being Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, and Doctor Doom. Now, at the time this was coming out, the Fantastic Four were in a bit of a weird situation with Marvel Comics. The comic book had been cancelled the year previously. This was all kind of stemming out of the era in which Fox were owning the movie rights and Marvel were trying to like de-emphasize the Fantastic Four and the X-Men a little bit and like really trying to promote like, you should read Inhumans instead and the Guardians of the Galaxy. So the Fantastic Four didn't have a comic at all for a little while, which is wild considering they are, the first family of Marvel and such a pivotal part of the universe. And Hickman, who was one of the last writers to write Fantastic Four and at least the last writer to write a really celebrated and iconic run, used Secret Wars as a vehicle to give the Fantastic Four this incredible send-off. The idea being that if the Fantastic Four never come back, this story is going to be like the emotional climax to the last 60 years of comics that they've been featured in. And so it's a story all about Reed Richards, Victor Von Doom, the decades-long rivalry and how it culminates here as these two men decide the fate of the universe. And not to spoil something I think you'll want to bring up later, matching that same level of kind of emotional the characters and the stakes and the intensity of that rivalry. I don't really know how you'll do that when, I think Fantastic Four First Steps looks really good. I'm really excited to see Pedro Pascal as Reed. And I'm assuming him and Doom will have some sort of history, if indeed Robert Downey Jr.'s Doom is from the same reality, which I imagine he is. I imagine it will be explained that they have some kind of personal history, and maybe the events that unfold with Galactus in First Steps may play into Doom's mission in the Avengers movies, so that's just my personal speculation. These films probably won't be able to capture the same gravitas and tone and feel that the comic has, where for comic readers, even readers who aren't as old as me or older than me, we've seen Reed and Doom battling issue after issue for years and years and years, since like 1961, 1962. And this is the end game for these characters. Mm-hmm. This is for Reed what Endgame the movie was for Tony Stark. And when this is like his second or third appearance in the MCU, you'd have to do a lot of work to maintain the same level of hype and emotional connection. The same for Doom. Like, this is the first time we're really seeing Doctor Doom in the MCU, and you're immediately going to his biggest story, arguably. Not that I think they can't do it.
Yeah.
The Russos and Marcus and McFeely have proven to be talented writers and directors. And while I'm not hugely thrilled about the casting, Downey is an incredible actor.
Mm-hmm.
But I have reservations that the movie will match the same level of gravitas and tone and the same kind of cathartic payoff that the comic gives, as being kind of like the ending of this decades-long saga for these two characters.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because like you just said, at its core, Secret Wars is a Fantastic Four story that features the ensemble of the Marvel cinematic, or not the cinematic, but the Marvel
Yeah.
Comics universe.
Like, it is a story that involves lots of, like, Doctor Strange is a big part of the story. Black Panther and Namor are a big part of the story. Spider-Man, Thanos, like characters that are big parts of the MCU are key players in Secret Wars.
Yeah.
But the two main characters of this comic are Reed Richards and Doctor Doom. Even the Maker plays a big role, and it's like, you know, you can get Miles Teller back for that, sure, but it does feel like they're just kind of throwing a lot in one go that usually would have a lot of build up into it.
Yeah, and that's the part where it just feels like this is their last gasp attempt at trying something, because they know interest in their cinematic universe is dwindling. They've had a series of failures. They don't know what to do other than to basically break glass in case of emergency, and this is what that is. But I just don't have confidence in them being able to do it justice. Like, even if Reed Richards isn't the main character and it's like Stephen Strange, which I think is probably the most likely scenario, given he has the most history out of everyone in this universe at this point. His film
And
was
also
like,
a character who historically has a big relationship with Doctor Doom as well.
yeah, exactly. But again, the problem is like, I don't know what Stephen Strange's relationship to Victor Von
It's the
Doom
show don't
is.
tell rule, isn't it? It's one thing for the movies to tell us that these characters have a really long and storied history, and it's another thing to show us organically over time. I think, well, I do think that Cumberbatch and Strange will probably play a big role in the movie, just because he is one of the biggest name actors that's still a kind of big part of the MCU. And
Right.
also that, like, Doctor Strange is a big part of the Secret Wars comic. He is kind of Doom's right-hand man and is a big part in turning the tide towards the hero's favor in the story. But I struggle to imagine a Secret Wars that is, you know, in some way claiming to be a faithful adaptation of Hickman and Ribick's story, not being about Reed Richards, because it is so much his story. Like, and also, like, Reed and Doom are like the Batman and Joker of the Marvel universe. They're so
Yeah,
intertwined with each other in a way that, like, other than like Charles Xavier and Magneto, Captain America and the Red Skull, Spider-Man and the Green Goblin, there's few characters in the company that really have that connection where it's like, this is the villain. That makes sense. Like, this is a story that would have a lot more emotional impact if we really like strung it out and built to it. You know, I read a report from Jeff Snyder this week, and, you know, don't believe everything you read on the internet, but apparently there's talks that Doomsday could potentially be delayed because they don't know which characters are going to be in the movie yet. And it's a movie that's going to be shooting in a couple of months. And I don't necessarily believe that myself, but I do feel like it's a case where the writers and the directors have kind of come in last minute and are scrambling to get this together as quick as possible, because Marvel want to get these movies out soon and kind of stop the slow decline that's kind of been happening with their films in recent times.
Yeah, and I think whether or not that happens, I mean, I guess remains to be seen. But I would actually say that would be a good idea if they delayed it, because then you could take that time and, like, you know, obviously perfect Doomsday and Secret Wars as these massive projects, but then you could also maybe hire some people to do smaller films in between there to build this up, to build these character relationships, lay a foundation, like establish who the Avengers are. I have no idea who the Avengers are, or what's going on, or like what are the young Avengers doing? Like
Not
it's
only that, but one of my favorite parts of the Secret Wars event when it happened in Marvel Comics in 2015 wasn't just the amazing main book that Hickman and Ribick did, but essentially for like a 6-month period, every book Marvel put out was set on Battleworld. You know, if you were reading Spider-Man, Spider-Man was affected by Secret Wars. Now you were reading Renew Your Vows, which was a story about a Peter from a different reality who him and MJ were still married and they were superheroes together with their daughter. If you were reading Wolverine, suddenly you were now reading an Old Man Logan book set on Battleworld. Every book became a Battleworld adjacent tie-in, essentially. And there were some really great ones. And it would be a fun opportunity for Marvel Studios to have like a mini phase in between kind of Doomsday and Secret Wars, of doing a couple of films and a show set on Battleworld, really make the most of this unique setting and do, you mentioned a World War Hulk film. If you wanted to do, there's a plethora. My favorite Secret Wars tie-in is a book called 1872, which is like Captain America, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, all of like the big Avengers characters, but they're living in like the Old West. And it's very like Back to the Future 3-esque. I love that book. You could do a TV show of that. But really like make the most of this setting, which you're never going to get a chance to do again. You're never going to get to destroy and blow up the entire universe.
That's how you get people interested again, because then you're taking big swings that where you don't have to worry about connectivity.
And
You can just
audiences
do
like
things.
something different. They like to be challenged, and they like to say, there is a bit of a thing where Marvel movies can feel a little bit formulaic at times, especially, we're 35 movies in. Audiences kind of know what they're expecting with an MCU film, which can be a good thing. It's very comforting to know this is what I'm going to get. But it's nice sometimes when a film shakes things up a little bit and, takes an approach like something like Logan, which is one of my favorite comic book movies, which is so tonally and stylistically different from the rest of the X-Men films, to really kind of mine this setting for all of the resources it can be. And I think that if they do decide they want to take more time and maybe delay the movie slightly, it gives them not only more time to figure out a cohesive roadmap to get to Doomsday and Secret Wars, where it won't feel as kind of thrown together, but also gives them more time to explore the setting of those movies and see if there's any other stories they can tell in the kind of middle of them.
If they didn't do that, that would be the biggest missed opportunity. As it is right now, it's like Doomsday and Secret Wars are filming back to back, and they're coming out basically a year after one another. And like, there's already like speculation that they're going to have a couple Battleworld movies in there, but like, maybe you should actually like have like a year where it's just films that are taking place on Battleworld and not just like rushing to the finale of this thing. Again, it's like there is this potential to do something really interesting, but as it stands right now with the schedules as is, we're barely going to be scratching the surface in terms of the potential here. Like you might have like one or two Battleworld films. Maybe you won't. Maybe they won't even take advantage of that because nothing has been announced. And granted, I get that because you want to kind of have that a secret. But if these films are coming out in such short sequence from one another, you can't hold in like a secret, like a World War Hulk film or something like that. Like it'll eventually get out. So take some time in between to tell those interesting stories.
It would be a real shame to blitz through Secret Wars.
It would be. And it already feels like that's what we're doing though, because again, yeah, aesthetically they could have everything nailed. They have all the money in the world, whatever. You've got like the proven talent who did Infinity War and Endgame. And despite my issues with the Russos, I do think that they are like, they know how to do this. But at the same time, what are these characters' relationships to one another? I don't know. Like, I don't know where they stand right now. There is no status quo. So how are you going to blow up the status quo and establish a new one when we don't even have like a baseline for anything? It's so frustrating.
Yeah, and not to open this can of worms again, because I feel like anytime I've mentioned it online, it's become a conversation I've very quickly not wanted to have. It's why the casting of Robert Downey Jr. kind of irks me a little bit. Is that Doom's ascension to the role of God Emperor and his kind of role as the villain and the antagonist of Secret Wars works because not only have comic readers followed Doom for years and years and years, in Fantastic Four comics and any other books he's appeared in, but throughout Hickman's run of Avengers and New Avengers, we see his and Strange and Molecule Man's quest. So basically what happens is, as the Avengers are trying to deal with the incursions, Doom, Strange, and Molecule Man go in search of this race of ancient beings called the Beyonders that are kind of like the gods of the Marvel Universe. And as the final incursions are happening and all of reality is destroyed, Doom steals the Beyonders' powers and uses it to take the fragments of the remaining realities and force them back together. And his story of doing that and his quest to take the Beyonders' powers and save all of the multiverse runs parallel to the story of the Avengers trying and failing to stop the incursions. So we see his story play out in real time. So by the time we get to Secret Wars, we understand everything that's happened. We understand his thought process and his ideology, and we understand the ramifications it's had in the wider world. In addition to just, we know who Doctor Doom is because we've been reading comics for however many years. Doing this as like the first Doom story changes a lot of that naturally, because fans, well, I think people have a general knowledge of who Doctor Doom is, either from previous movies or just kind of through cultural osmosis. We don't know who this Doom is yet. We don't know this Doom's backstory. We don't know what world he's from. We don't know what's happened to him. We don't know who he's friends with, who he's enemies with, who he's in love with, all of these kind of situations. So they've got to introduce all of that, introduce all of the heavy world building that gets us to Doomsday and Secret Wars, and then introduce a kind of cathartic emotional payoff with a character like a Reed Richards, a Stephen Strange, or someone else as the kind of main character. While we've never seen them really interact before, it's a lot to do in one or two movies.
Yeah.
And my big concern from the start with the Downey casting was never about his acting talents. You know, we've seen him be amazing as Iron Man, and then we saw him in Oppenheimer give one of the best performances I've seen in so many years. He's not only is he incredible in that film, but he really transforms out of that role that he's kind of been playing for so long of the kind of witty, sarcastic, smart-ass character. And so I have no doubts that he will give good performances in these movies. My concern was always that with how quickly they're building up to this, they're going to use Tony Stark as a shorthand to save building up Doom as he normally would have been, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That was exactly my thought.
And I'm not
Yeah,
saying this
yeah.
is the direction they're going in, and the concept art definitely isn't that. But my biggest fear would be that it's just I hate you 3000. It is just,
Yeah.
he's not Victor Von Doom, the kind of tyrannical ruler of Latveria and arch enemy of Reed Richards. He is a Tony Stark variant.
Yeah.
Which, if you wanted to do a movie with an evil Tony Stark from the multiverse, I'd be down for that. I think that would be cool. I love Superior Iron Man by Tom Taylor. I think that would be a cool movie.
Uh-huh.
But Doctor Doom is kind of, you don't get much better in terms of comic book villains than Doctor Doom. He's up there with the Joker, Magneto, Darkseid, all your heavy hitters. My real concern is that because of the quick turnaround, how quickly they've got to establish Doom, taking the mask off, and it's Robert Downey Jr. and the Avengers all look in horror, and Spider-Man, starts crying or whatever. It's a really quick shorthand to build an emotional connection with the audience. And, the Russos and Marcus and McFeely are all talented people and take their time and come up with a better kind of introduction for the characters than that. But that is a genuine concern I have, that they're going to kind of lean quite heavily into the Tony Starkness as a way to quickly establish this character and who he is without taking the necessary time that they otherwise would to introduce Doom and build Secret Wars.
Yeah, definitely. That's why you cast someone like Robert Downey Jr. in that role, so that you have that shorthand and you don't have to go through all of the legwork of establishing Doom as a character.
This isn't to say that I don't think Robert Downey Jr. could play a good Doctor Doom, because I'm sure he could. He's a very talented actor. However, and this might just be me being a comic book purist and wanting to see the stories I've already read come to life on the big screen, but Doom is a character that, doesn't take his mask off a lot, doesn't kind of act and perceive himself as a regular person. He is a guy that speaks almost exclusively in the third person, like The Rock. He is Doom. And all of these things Tony Stark is not. Now, Tony Stark's an amazing character in the MCU. No question about that. I love Downey's portrayal of Tony. But that character and Doom are diametrically opposed in a lot of ways. While I think Downey could completely change the way he plays his character to be Doom, and I would quite like to see that, to see him just completely shed all of the Tony Starkness about him and play something completely different to any role I've ever seen him do. I think that would be awesome. I do have concerns that they might be leaning into the Tony Starkness about it. But again, like we said, going back to the concept art seems fairly faithful to who Doom is in Secret Wars.
Yeah, it's like at least they'll nail like the look and everything and the aesthetic. I mean, it seems like that's going to be the case.
Let's say that it's not a faithful adaptation. Let's just say they take the basic cliff beats of Secret Wars and do their own thing, as Marvel have done with virtually all of the comics they've adapted. The only ones I can think of that are like really close adaptations are something like The Winter Soldier, which is a pretty, for the most part, straightforward adaptation of the original Ed Brubaker, Steve Epting book. But for most of that, they remix things, they pull a lot of stuff together. They kind of play fast and loose with what they adapt. And that's worked well for Marvel over the last 20 years. No doubt. And it could be a good movie. They could take the basic cliff beats of Secret Wars, do their own thing, and it could make for a very satisfying and entertaining movie.
And I think for me, my biggest thing is like this year we're getting our first proper, hopefully, Fantastic Four film. The Fantastic Four have never been adapted in a way that was universally accepted before on screen. And so while like, yes, we've had various iterations, none of them have ever taken. And so this is really their first chance for them to, come to prominence and take up with like, the audience. Like we haven't spent a lot of time with them. We need to understand them at a base level. Like it's one thing to do a movie, but maybe do another movie so we could develop them further. We don't even know what the ground level is of I keep going back to this, but it's like the Fantastic Four have not been established in this universe, and they are one of the most important missing pieces of this universe. And we're going to get the film this year, but to then just go from that to big event culmination movie without us having like spent time with them, without developing their relationships, without establishing Doctor Doom as a regular villain. They could have done with Doom what they did with Loki in that first Avengers movie, where it's like you establish Loki as a villain, you understand his relationship with Thor, and then you get to the Avengers film and it's like that, vendetta against his brother and people like him and like all the things that he represents is then, you see that kind of brought to fruition and culminate in the Avengers, and it works. It's like, oh yeah, Loki is a bad guy, and we saw the seeds planted for that in that first Thor film. They should be doing that with Doctor Doom, and because Galactus is the bad guy in the Fantastic Four movie, we know that Doom isn't going to be a factor in there. Maybe he'll show up, maybe he won't, but it's like if your base level for Doctor Doom is Avengers Doomsday, you're trying to do the Thanos thing again where you establish him in one movie and you give us all the backstory and whatnot, and you make Doomsday Doom's movie. There's so many aspects of that I like and don't like, because it's like, it's cool that we get
But
a
it's a
Doom
gamble.
movie. It is a gamble. It's just one I don't see paying off, because like I want to know what Doom's relationship is with Doctor Strange or Reed. Like I need a sense of the history between these characters in order to make these massive like universe blowing up like moments hit,
You've got to build that trust and that love of those characters that Marvel so expertly did with Cap and with Tony and with Thor over, a span of years and years and years. So when we get to Infinity War and Endgame, Steve's kind of defiant one-man stand against this armada means so much. It's why On Your Left means so much. It's why, Tony's, I am Iron Man moment. If that had happened in Iron Man 2 or in Avengers 1, I don't think that moment would have had the same emotional weight. It's because we followed these characters over so long. And something I keep coming back to is for what that moment in an Endgame is for those characters, Secret Wars should be for the Fantastic Four. So doing it so quickly means there's a lot of ground to catch up on. And I think there's valid concerns to have about whether or not Marvel can effectively do that without changing what Secret Wars is so much.
Yeah, no, for sure. And to kind of put a pin on that point, I mean, it's like Avengers Endgame and Infinity War works because they have that history to draw upon. On Your Left wasn't in Captain America's first film. That was in The Winter Soldier. The Avengers are fractured in Civil War, not in the first Avenger.
That's the
right?
climax of like 10 years worth of movies and stories. And it builds off all of that really organically. And if Endgame was Avengers 1, it wouldn't have the same emotional weight because we don't really have the same connection to these characters. And I think the same thing is here. You could do a Secret Wars where the Fantastic Four are newly established and don't know anyone else in this world, but you'd be losing so much of what makes the comic, in my opinion, so incredible. And I think that, as we keep coming back to, that is a valid concern to have.
Yeah, for sure. While the concept art looks cool and promising and like I'm digging everything that they're showing me like artistically, I just don't have the confidence to say that I think that this is all going to work out and it's all going to be the best version of Secret Wars that could be realized on screen. Like we said at the beginning, concept art does not necessarily equate to what we're going to get on screen. So take these images with a grain of salt. They also might not be used, right? This could have been concept art that was thrown out and maybe they're going in a completely different direction. Knowing how much of a fan the Russos are of Secret Wars, I would be shocked if they didn't go in this very medieval-like direction. But I think what it comes down to is just a lack of baseline. We have no idea what this universe is at this point because we've gotten so many different scattershot ideas. Multiverse of Madness looked like he was taking the universe in one way and then it didn't. Wakanda Forever and Quantumania and other films looked like they were taking the universe in one direction and it didn't because these ideas didn't take hold. And so now they're pivoting to like the ultimate break glass in case of emergency sort of thing, which is fine. But again, when your universe is so weirdly ill-defined at this point, not that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is ill-defined in general, but where the Marvel Cinematic Universe is post-Endgame is so ill-defined to then leap into something as ambitious as this that is oriented around all of these characters and relationships because of past adventures and seeing them grow and interact with one another. It's hard not to be skeptical about all of this. It just feels like a very condensed thing that they're going to, again, as we mentioned with the casting of Robert Downey Jr., rely on nostalgia as shorthand to, I guess, evoke some sort of emotional moments, and that's not what we want to see. I don't want this to be the first time that we see Doctor Doom. Unfortunately, it's going to be that, but he's a character with an incredible history in the comics who has had many other great stories that aren't Secret Wars that I would have liked to have seen. I would have liked to have seen his relationship with the Fantastic Four be a thing before he's coming into this, I guess, the resolution of it.
Just to throw something out there, I would have loved a there's a comic called Doctor Doom, Doctor Strange, Triumph and Torment, which is about the two of them going to hell to fight Mephisto. That
That's
would have been a
sick.
great movie in
That's
and of
fucking
itself.
awesome. And then
That
you get
comic's
the
great.
yeah, well, and you get the Doom and Strange relationship there. So you could establish that instead of establishing it in Doomsday. I get they did a lot of that in Infinity War, establishing some of these characters and whatnot, and you know,
But the difference with that is that, like, and I'm sure that Doomsday is going to very much a Doom POV movie in the same way that Infinity War is a Thanos POV movie. But, and it sounds crazy because in Infinity War, the Avengers were separated, but it didn't feel like we had to really like establish the cast of characters in Infinity War. There was obviously the getting the band back together moments, but for the most part, we knew who all the heroes were. We knew their relationships. Once everyone came together, it was pretty much kind of at the races. Whereas with this, like, we don't know what characters are going to be in Doomsday. We don't know who the main players are, who the Avengers are going to be, what actors are back, what actors aren't back. You've got to like build that team. You've got to build the heroes as well as building the villain. I think there's a lot to do there. I think there are valid reasons to be apprehensive, and I think this apprehension, this concern, only comes from a place of love of the MCU, of Marvel as a brand and as a kind of world, and wanting to see these stories and these characters be treated in the best way possible. For my own personal feelings, I've said this to death on this show. Secret Wars is one of my favorite comics of all time. I think it's a perfect character study of Doctor Doom, of Reed Richards, of these characters that have defined Marvel Comics for so many years. I want to see that done. I want to see it done properly with the correct build up and not kind of taking any shortcuts or rushing. And I do think with how quickly Marvel are trying to put all this together after the previous plans kind of fell apart. If this Doomsday movie was coming out in 3 or 4 years' time, I don't think I would have as much concerns because like we said, the Russos are talented directors. The writers have done good stuff. Like, the people making these movies are all proven in the MCU to make some of the best projects. But I think that, like, and if anyone can piece this together in a year or two, it's these guys.
Oh, and let everyone know where they can find you.
Thank you, Griffin, so much for having me. This has been a really fun conversation. If you've enjoyed listening to my wild ramblings about comics, head on over to my channel, Owen Likes Comics, and you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, just at Owen Likes Comics.
Go show him some love. Go watch his Daredevil video. Go watch his Secret Wars video. Go watch all of his videos, actually. That's really what we need to be doing. All right, guys. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you in the next one.